Luke was a man in his early 30s, living a quiet and somewhat lonely life in a small town. He worked in a modest office, where the days passed like a gentle river, calm and uneventful. His circle of friends was small, limited to a few close acquaintances who had known him for years. But despite the routine of his life, there was a sense of emptiness within him, a feeling that something important was missing. His closest friend, Jack, had been by his side for as long as Luke could remember. Their bond was unbreakable, formed through years of shared experiences, laughter, and moments of hardship. Jack had been the kind of friend who always had Luke's back, the one who never hesitated to lend a hand or share a joke. They had been through everything together, the ups, the downs, the milestones, and the losses. But now, as fate would have it, Jack was on his deathbed, fighting a battle he couldn't win. The illness that had taken over his body was quick and unforgiving, and Luke watched helplessly as his best friend deteriorated before his eyes. In those final moments, Jack, weak but still able to speak, made a request that would change everything for Luke. He asked Luke to marry a woman he had never met, Emma. Jack explained that years ago, he had promised Emma's family that she would be well taken care of, and now, on his deathbed, he wanted Luke to fulfill that promise. Luke sat at his friend's side, stunned and uncertain, trying to process the request. Jack's voice was soft, and though his body was frail, there was a strength in his words. "Marry her, Luke. Take care of her, like I promised," Jack whispered, his eyes pleading with Luke for understanding. Luke's mind raced. He had never imagined such a request, especially from someone like Jack, who had always been so full of life and humor. But now, with Jack's life slipping away, the weight of the request was impossible to ignore. Jack had made this promise years ago, and now, at the very end, he was asking Luke to step in, to marry a complete stranger, and to live up to a promise made long before Luke had even met her. It seemed impossible, absurd even, yet the sincerity in Jack's voice made it clear that this was not a request that could be brushed aside. As Jack's breathing grew more labored, he repeated his request. "You're the only one I trust, Luke. Please." The words haunted Luke long after Jack's final breath. He sat there, in the silence of the hospital room, unsure of how to proceed. The idea of marrying someone he didn't know was foreign to him, a concept so far removed from his life that it felt like a dream. How could he marry a stranger, a woman he had never seen, let alone shared a life with? And yet, the weight of Jack's dying wish hung over him like a heavy cloud. The next few days were filled with nothing but questions and doubts. Luke couldn't stop thinking about Jack's last words. His heart ached as he thought about how much his friend had meant to him, how much Jack had done for him over the years. But the idea of marrying someone he knew nothing about, someone whose life he would now be bound to, was overwhelming. What if they didn't get along? What if he couldn't be the person Emma needed? Could he really keep this promise, knowing the enormous responsibility it carried? Luke's life had always been simple and predictable, but now it seemed like everything was being thrown into chaos. The idea of stepping into a stranger's life, of fulfilling a promise to someone he had never met, seemed both ridiculous and profound. He felt torn between his loyalty to Jack, who had been his best friend, and his own fears of the unknown future that lay ahead with Emma. He spent days wrestling with himself, trying to find a way out of the situation. But deep down, he knew that Jack had trusted him. Jack had never asked for much, and now, in his final moments, he was asking for something that felt impossible. Luke was caught between his own fear and the honor of fulfilling his friend's last wish. Could he really go through with it? Could he marry a stranger, fulfill a promise he hadn't made, and change the course of his own life forever? The questions plagued him, yet the weight of Jack's request was undeniable. He couldn't bring himself to say no. Jack had been there for him, and now it was his turn to be there for Jack, even if it meant stepping into a life he hadn't planned for. As Luke made his decision, he knew that this would change everything. It would change his life, and it would change Emma's life. But there was no going back now. With a heavy heart and a mind full of uncertainty, Luke resolved to honor Jack's last request. He would marry Emma. Luke arrived at the small town where Emma lived, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. He had never imagined that fulfilling Jack's last request would bring him here, to a stranger's doorstep, ready to marry a woman he had never met. The moment he stepped off the wagon, his nerves were on edge. He wasn't sure what to expect from Emma or how she would react to him, a man who had no part in her life until now, but was now supposed to become her husband. Emma stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of confusion and caution. Her eyes studied Luke carefully, as if searching for any hint of his true intentions. She had heard of him, of course. Jack had spoken of him often, but meeting him in person was something entirely different. To Emma, the situation felt surreal, and she couldn't quite grasp what was happening. A man, a stranger, was here to marry her because of a promise Jack had made years ago. She had no idea what kind of man Luke was or whether she could trust him. Luke felt the tension in the air as soon as he saw her. There was a long moment of silence between them before either of them spoke. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. He could see the wariness in her eyes, the way she held herself back, as if she was protecting herself from a hurt she couldn't yet face. Emma was clearly hesitant, uncertain about what was happening, and Luke couldn't blame her. He, too, was struggling with the gravity of the situation. He had promised Jack, but he didn't know what this promise would mean for both of them. "Hello," Luke said softly, offering her a tentative smile. Emma didn't return it. Instead, she took a step back, still standing in the doorway, as if trying to keep some distance between them. Her eyes never left his face, reading him with a wariness Luke had never experienced before. He couldn't blame her for it. After all, Jack's request had placed them both in a position neither of them had chosen. "I suppose you're the one who—" Emma started, her voice trailing off. She didn't finish the sentence, but Luke knew exactly what she meant. He nodded, feeling the awkwardness between them grow thicker. "Yes," he said simply, unsure of how to continue. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The news of Jack's passing had hit her hard, but this request, this marriage to a stranger, felt like a cruel twist of fate. She had lost Jack, and now she was being asked to marry someone she didn't know, someone she hadn't even spoken to before today. It was too much to process, too much to accept, and yet she couldn't bring herself to refuse. Jack had been like a brother to her, and his dying wish meant something. But could she really go through with it? Could she marry Luke without feeling like she was betraying herself? "I don't know what to say," Emma admitted, her voice soft but full of emotion. "This is all overwhelming. I don't even know you." Luke nodded, understanding the hesitation in her voice. He didn't know her either. This was a marriage of necessity, not of choice. He wasn't offering her love, and he wasn't expecting it from her in return. All he could offer was the promise to keep his word, to honor Jack's last wish. "I understand," Luke said, his voice gentle. "This is as strange for me as it is for you. But I made a promise to Jack. He was my best friend, and he asked me to take care of you. That's all I can offer you right now. My word, and my commitment to fulfilling his request." Emma's eyes narrowed slightly as she listened to him. The words sounded kind, but they felt distant, too distant to be real. How could she trust him? How could she trust anyone after everything she had been through? Her life had been filled with disappointment, broken promises, and people who had let her down. She had been through a lot, and now she was being asked to start a new chapter with a man she knew nothing about. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not sure I can do this. I didn't expect this." Luke could feel the weight of her words, the pain she was hiding behind her caution. He saw the struggle in her eyes, the grief that had yet to be healed, the uncertainty that lingered in every word she spoke. "I'm not asking you to love me," Luke said quietly. "I'm just asking you to give me a chance to honor Jack's wish. I don't expect anything from you. We'll keep it simple. just a marriage of convenience. No expectations of love, no expectations of anything more than what we need to fulfill this promise. Emma looked at him for a long time, studying his face, trying to read his sincerity. There was a raw honesty in his words, something that made her hesitate. She had no reason to trust him, but there was something in the way he spoke that made her wonder if, perhaps, he was just as trapped in this situation as she was. Just practical reasons, she murmured, more to herself than to him. No love. No. Anything. Just a promise. Yes, Luke confirmed, his voice steady. Just a promise. Emma let out a long, shaky breath. She was scared, more scared than she had been in a long time, but she knew she had no other choice. She had to trust him, at least for now. Jack had asked for this, and Jack had been a good man, someone who had always kept his promises. She owed it to him to try. All right, she said, her voice quieter now, resigned. I'll marry you, but I'm not promising anything more than what you've already said. This is just a way to keep his promise. Nothing more. Luke nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He had expected her to refuse, expected her to run from the idea. But instead, she had agreed, albeit reluctantly. He could only hope that time would make things easier, that their arrangement would become more than just a marriage of convenience. As they sat down together to discuss the details of their marriage, they set their expectations clearly. They both knew that this was not a love story, not by any means. It was simply two strangers coming together for the sake of a promise made long ago by a man who is now gone. Neither of them had any illusions about what this would be. There would be no romantic gestures, no fairy tale moments. It would be a practical arrangement, a partnership built on necessity rather than affection. They would share a home, a life, but not their hearts, not yet anyway. Emma's backstory slowly unfolded as they talked. She revealed pieces of her past, her family, the things she had lost, the struggles she had faced on her own. Luke listened quietly, absorbing her words. He didn't know everything about her yet, but he was beginning to understand the weight she carried. She had trusted Jack, trusted him in ways she had never trusted anyone else. But now, with him gone, she was left to pick up the pieces of her life and face an uncertain future. Jack had been her close friend, but he wasn't the person she had ever imagined marrying. He had promised her family that she would be taken care of, and now, Luke was the one who was supposed to do that. She had never expected this, never wanted this. But here she was, agreeing to marry a stranger for a promise that was not hers to keep. As their conversation came to an end, Emma felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't sure what would come next, but for now, she had made her decision. She would honor Jack's request, and perhaps, in time, she would find a way to make this strange marriage work. The wedding was a quiet affair, held in a small, nondescript chapel on the outskirts of town. There were no grand decorations, no tears or joyous celebrations. Just a simple ceremony with a few of Emma's distant relatives in attendance, and a solemn minister to oversee it all. Luke stood at the front, his heart heavy with confusion and guilt. The vows he recited felt empty, like he was speaking words he didn't fully believe. Yet, there was an undeniable sense of finality in the moment, a realization that this was now his life, whether he was ready for it or not. Emma, standing across from him, looked equally detached. Her eyes were focused on the floor, avoiding Luke's gaze. She didn't want to be here, but she had made a promise to Jack, and this was the price of that promise. She had no choice but to follow through, even if the decision left her feeling more isolated than ever. She had always imagined a different kind of life, one that wasn't dictated by obligation or the dying wishes of others. But now, standing in front of Luke, she felt like she was losing control of her own destiny. When the minister asked if they took each other as husband and wife, their voices barely whispered the words. The whole exchange was more about duty than love, and both of them knew it. There was no spark between them, no connection that made the moment meaningful. It was just a marriage of necessity, a contractual obligation to fulfill a promise made by a man who was now gone. Luke's inner turmoil only deepened as the ceremony came to a close. He had agreed to marry Emma out of respect for Jack's dying wish, but the weight of his actions was beginning to settle in. He had taken on a responsibility he wasn't prepared for, and now he was bound to a woman who didn't want to be with him, not in any real sense. He felt guilty for marrying her without her consent, for forcing her into a situation where she had no choice but to comply. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had done something wrong, something that was now changing both their lives in ways he hadn't fully understood. Emma, too, struggled with her own feelings after the wedding. She had agreed to marry Luke, but she didn't do so out of love or desire. She had done it because she felt trapped by Jack's request, because she owed him, and because, in a strange way, she thought this was the only way to honor his memory. But now that it was done, she felt betrayed by the circumstances. Her life had been turned upside down by a promise she hadn't made, and she was forced to live with the consequences. She couldn't help but feel resentment toward Luke, even though she knew he was just as much a victim of Jack's request as she was. Still, she agreed to move in with him temporarily. She had no other choice, really. She had nowhere else to go, and Jack's wish weighed heavily on her conscience. It wasn't like she could just walk away and leave Luke to carry out a promise alone. So, she settled into his house, a stranger in her own life, wondering how long this arrangement would last and whether it would ever feel like something more than just a practical decision. Life after the wedding was a series of awkward moments and strained silences. Luke and Emma lived under the same roof, but there was no warmth between them, no shared history to bond them together. They went about their days like two people who were just passing through each other's lives, doing what was necessary, but nothing more. They maintained separate lives, their routines distinct and isolated. Emma kept to herself most of the time, quietly going about her business, while Luke worked during the day and came home in the evening to the same silence that greeted him every night. Their interactions were brief and cautious. They would exchange polite greetings when they crossed paths in the hallway or at the dinner table, but nothing beyond that. They avoided each other's eyes, never lingering long enough to spark any conversation. There was no need for it, and neither of them was eager to break the cold barrier that separated them. They had made an agreement, and that was all it was, a legal contract, not a marriage. But over time, something began to shift, even if it was just the tiniest of changes. In the quiet, everyday moments, Luke and Emma started to learn small things about each other. They noticed how Emma would always make tea in the evening, her preferred brand of chamomile, leaves gently floating in the steaming water. Luke, in turn, would retreat to his study, his eyes scanning over papers and books, the hum of his work filling the space. At first, these small details went unnoticed, mere background noise in the larger picture of their awkward marriage. But gradually, as the days turned into weeks, they began to pay attention to one another. There were moments when their paths crossed in the kitchen, and they would share brief, guarded conversations. "I hope this tea isn't too strong," Emma would say, offering a cup with a polite smile. Luke would nod, taking it from her hand. "No, it's perfect," he'd reply, grateful for the small act of kindness, even if it was more out of routine than genuine affection. In these fleeting exchanges, there was no deep connection, no sudden burst of emotion. But there was something else, an unspoken understanding, a recognition that they were both living in the same house, sharing the same space, and somehow they had to make it work. They were stuck in a situation neither of them had chosen, and slowly they began to accept that. They had both agreed to this marriage for different reasons, but they hadn't expected it to be so difficult. The weight of their respective feelings, his guilt, her resentment, had created a barrier that was hard to cross. Yet despite the awkwardness, There were moments of quiet vulnerability. One evening, after dinner, Emma had finished cleaning up the kitchen when Luke appeared by the doorway. He hesitated, unsure of what to say, but there was something in his expression that made her pause. "How are you doing?" he asked, his voice soft, a rare break from the cold formality they had adopted. Emma looked at him for a moment, unsure of how to answer. She wasn't used to being asked such questions, and the sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "I'm managing," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his for the first time in days. "It's just strange, all of this." Luke nodded, feeling a small knot of guilt twist in his stomach. "Yeah, I know," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "I didn't think it would be like this. I thought, I thought maybe we could make it easier, somehow." Emma didn't respond right away, but for the first time, she felt a flicker of understanding between them. Neither of them wanted to be here, neither of them had asked for this life, but they were both stuck in it. And for a brief moment, they shared something real, something beyond obligation or duty. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a beginning. As the days turned into weeks, they continued to live side by side, learning about each other in small, quiet ways. The tension didn't disappear, and the awkwardness never truly left, but there were moments of silent understanding, of shared experiences that slowly began to build a foundation. Neither of them knew where this would lead, but for now, they were simply trying to make it work, step by careful step. Over time, Luke began to notice the small things about Emma that he hadn't paid attention to before. In the beginning, their marriage had been nothing more than an obligation, a promise made to a dying friend, nothing more. But as days turned into weeks, Luke found himself seeing Emma in a new light, noticing the quiet things that made her who she was. He noticed the way she cared for the stray cats that would often wander near the house, offering them food with a gentle touch, as if they were her own. He saw how she would leave little scraps of food for the birds in the yard, smiling to herself as she did. It was the little details that began to catch his attention. The way she hummed softly to herself when she was cooking, the way she would pause to appreciate the changing colors of the sky at dusk, or how she always took time to arrange flowers in the vases around the house, making sure the house looked alive with small bursts of color. Her quirky habits, once overlooked, now seemed endearing. The way she always folded the towels in a certain pattern, or how she would laugh to herself when reading a book, her eyes crinkling at the corners. These small gestures, things he had never paid attention to, began to intrigue him. Slowly, the distant woman who had walked into his life out of obligation was turning into someone he wanted to understand. Luke couldn't help but feel drawn to her kindness, her ability to find joy in simple things, and her strength in keeping her emotions hidden from the world. There was more to Emma than he had first thought, and he was beginning to see it. For Emma, the transition was slow but steady. At first, she had kept her distance, unwilling to let Luke in. She didn't know how to let go of the walls she had built around herself, walls formed by years of disappointment and grief. But gradually, she began to let those walls down, piece by piece, as she spent more time with Luke. She started to trust him, not entirely, but enough to share glimpses of her past, the struggles she had endured before coming to this point in her life. One evening, while they were sitting in silence by the fire, Emma surprised Luke by speaking about her childhood. She told him how she had grown up in a family that was always struggling, how her parents had tried their best, but there was never enough to go around. She talked about the dreams she had once had of becoming a teacher, of a life where she could help others, but how those dreams had been shattered when her family situation became too dire. Luke listened carefully, not interrupting, just letting her speak. He could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the pain that still lingered from those years of hardship. It made him realize that Emma had never really had the chance to live for herself, that she had always been caught up in the demands of others, especially her family. It made him feel guilty for not having seen this before, for not having understood her struggle until now. Her hidden warmth, the kindness she showed to animals, to strangers was rooted in a deep well of compassion that had been built over years of sacrifice. It was as if she had never allowed herself to receive kindness in return, instead giving it freely to everyone around her. Luke could now see how much she had been holding inside, how much she had bottled up, and how hard it had been for her to open up even a little. Over the course of several weeks, their interactions grew warmer, though still cautious. They would help each other with small tasks around the house. Luke fixing a broken chair while Emma arranged the flowers. Emma cooking a meal while Luke worked in the garden. These small acts of cooperation, though simple, began to bridge the gap between them. There were moments when they would exchange a glance that spoke volumes, a silent understanding passing between them that needed no words. It was in the way Luke would always ask if she needed help with something, or the way Emma would leave a cup of tea waiting for him when he came home late. These small, thoughtful gestures were their way of saying, "I see you," without the need for grand declarations or emotions that neither of them were ready for. One day, Luke came home from work to find Emma sitting by the window, staring out at the sunset. She was holding a small notebook in her hands, her fingers lightly tracing the pages. He stood there for a moment, watching her in the quiet of the evening before approaching her. "What are you writing?" he asked, his voice soft, as though he didn't want to interrupt the peace of the moment. Emma looked up at him, startled for a moment, but then her lips curved into a small, almost shy smile. "Just memories," she said, her voice low. "Things I've seen, things I've lived through." She paused, as if weighing whether to share more. "I used to write when I was younger, when life felt a little more like mine." Luke sat down beside her, his curiosity piqued. "Can I read some of it?" Emma hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet. Maybe one day." But there was something in the way she said it, something that made Luke understand that this was a step forward. She was beginning to share her past with him, to open up in ways she hadn't before. Their small moments of tenderness continued to grow. One evening, after a particularly difficult day for both of them, Luke came home to find Emma sitting at the kitchen table, looking down at her hands. There was a quiet sadness in her eyes, and Luke immediately felt the pull to comfort her. He sat down beside her without saying a word, just offering his presence. Emma looked up at him, her eyes meeting his for the first time that day. "It's just hard sometimes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke nodded, his hand reaching out to cover hers. "I know, but you're not alone, Emma." She squeezed his hand in return, the smallest gesture of trust, and for a brief moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. It was just them, sharing the quiet understanding that sometimes silence spoke louder than words. These moments of connection, though fleeting, were enough to start building something new between them. They still weren't in love. There were still walls between them, barriers of fear and uncertainty. But the foundation was slowly being laid. They were learning to trust each other, learning to be there for each other in ways that were unexpected. Luke had begun to realize that this marriage, this life they were building together, was something he had never expected. It was messy, it was complicated, but it was real. And with each small act of kindness, with each quiet moment of understanding, they were moving closer to something that neither of them had imagined when they first agreed to this arrangement. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger, not through grand gestures or declarations of love, but through the quiet, unseen connections they formed in the everyday moments. These were the moments that would eventually change everything for both of them, even if neither of them could see it yet. Luke found himself in a constant battle with his emotions. He had married Emma for a reason that felt distant from love, out of obligation to his late friend Jack, a promise he could not break. At first, their marriage had felt like a contract, an arrangement between two strangers who shared nothing more than the same roof. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Luke noticed something shifting inside him. His feelings for Emma were changing, growing more complex and more real than he had ever anticipated. He began to wonder if his growing attachment to her was more than just a product of guilt, a sense of responsibility that weighed heavily on him every day. The more time he spent with her, the more he appreciated her strength and resilience. There was something quietly beautiful about the way she navigated life, even when it felt like everything had been stacked against her. Emma had a way of moving through the world with grace, even when she was struggling internally, and Luke couldn't help but admire that about her. He found himself drawn to her in a way that was new and unfamiliar, unsure if it was love or something else entirely. It was an unsettling feeling, one that made him question everything he thought he knew about his own heart. Emma, too, was starting to open up to Luke in ways she had never done before. The walls she had carefully built around herself over the years were beginning to crack, slowly but surely. She had always been closed off, keeping her vulnerabilities hidden, but Luke's quiet presence and unspoken support made her feel safe enough to share parts of herself that she had long kept buried. She spoke of her childhood, of the dreams she had once held tightly to but had abandoned along the way. She spoke of the pain she had endured, the losses she had faced, and how she had always carried the weight of her past on her shoulders. With each word, Luke was moved by her resilience. He realized that Emma's strength wasn't just about surviving. It was about persevering despite everything that life had thrown at her. She had never asked for anything from him, but now, as she opened up to him, Luke began to feel a deep respect for her, a respect that went far beyond the obligation that had originally brought them together. The emotional distance they had both set at the beginning of their marriage seemed less necessary now. Luke could feel the tension between them start to fade, replaced by something more genuine, more real. The awkwardness that had once defined their interactions was slowly being replaced by moments of warmth and understanding. They no longer felt like two strangers coexisting in the same house. They were beginning to find common ground, to see each other in a new light. Emma, too, felt a shift within herself. At first, she had seen Luke as nothing more than a man she had been forced to marry. He was kind, yes, but he was also a reminder of the strange, uncomfortable reality she now found herself in. But as time went on, Emma began to see Luke differently. He wasn't just the man who had agreed to fulfill Jack's request. He was her companion, someone who had stood by her side, offering his help and support without asking for anything in return. Emma had never had someone care for her in this way, without ulterior motives, without expecting anything from her. It was a quiet, subtle change, but it was there, and it made her view Luke in a new light. For Luke, this change didn't come all at once. At first, he had thought he was simply helping Emma, fulfilling his role in this strange marriage. But as he watched her day after day, as he listened to her speak about her life, her struggles, and her hopes for the future, he realized that his feelings for her were no longer just about duty. They were real, and they were growing deeper with each passing day. He had started this marriage as a man doing what he thought was right, but now he was seeing Emma as more than just a stranger. She had become someone he cared for deeply, someone he didn't want to lose. Their connection grew slowly, subtly, built on small acts of kindness and quiet moments of understanding. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Emma made dinner for Luke. It wasn't anything special, just a simple meal of stew and bread, but the care she put into it was undeniable. She placed the meal in front of him with a smile, and for a moment, they both sat in silence, the comfort of shared space enveloping them. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was something. It was their way of saying, "I'm here," without needing to speak the words. In that moment, Luke realized that these small moments of tenderness were what mattered. They didn't need grand declarations to show they cared. It was in the quiet, everyday things. Emma, too, had her moments of revelation. She began to see that Luke wasn't the man she had initially assumed him to be. He wasn't just fulfilling a promise out of some sense of duty. He was genuinely trying to be a good husband, to be someone she could rely on. He didn't push her to open up before she was ready, didn't demand anything from her. He simply offered his presence, his patience, and his quiet support. For Emma, this was a revelation. It wasn't the kind of love she had expected, the kind she had once dreamed of, but it was real. It was a love that was patient and steady, built on mutual respect and understanding. And slowly, she began to let herself believe that this, whatever it was enough. For Luke, the realization came in small bursts. He began to reflect on how far he had come since that first awkward meeting with Emma. He had married her out of a sense of duty, yes, but now he found himself falling for her in a way he hadn't expected. He respected her strength, admired her resilience, and, dare he admit it, he cared for her deeply. He had thought this would be a simple, transactional marriage, but it had turned into something far more complex, far more real. He had never expected to feel this way, but now, as he looked at Emma, he couldn't deny the truth any longer. He had fallen for her. Their shared experiences, quiet evenings spent in each other's company, helping each other with small tasks around the house, offering support during tough times, had transformed them from strangers into partners. Luke realized that what they had now, though still new and fragile, was more than he had ever expected. They were no longer just a couple brought together by obligation. They were a team, learning to navigate life together one day at a time. And for the first time, Luke realized that this was exactly what he had needed all along. Someone to share his life with, someone to build a future with, no matter how unconventional the beginning had been. For Emma, the change was just as significant. She had started this marriage as a woman trapped in a promise she didn't make, but now she was beginning to see Luke as more than just a stranger. He was someone she could depend on, someone who understood her in ways she hadn't expected. She still wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time since she had married him, she began to believe that it could be something good. Luke had become her companion, and, in his own quiet way, he had become someone she could see herself with for the long haul. As time passed, they both realized that what they had now, though it had begun out of obligation, was evolving into something more. They had built a foundation, not on grand gestures or promises of forever, but on small, steady acts of care and understanding. It was slow, but it was real, and that, they both realized, was enough. As time passed, Luke and Emma found themselves face to face with their pasts, things they had long buried in their hearts. For Luke, the guilt of marrying Emma out of obligation weighed heavily on him, and he often wondered if he had betrayed her in some way. He also carried the burden of Jack's death, the promise he made, and how that had brought him to this place. For Emma, the emotional baggage was even heavier. She had been forced into a marriage with a stranger, a man who, although kind, was not the one she had imagined sharing her life with. She had struggled with her feelings about Jack, the man who had promised to take care of her, only to leave her with this strange responsibility. One evening, as Luke and Emma were settling into their routine at home, their fragile peace was disrupted. A loud knock echoed through the house, startling them both. Luke opened the door to find Tom, an old rival from his past, standing there with two rough-looking men. Tom had always held a grudge against Luke, stemming from a business deal gone wrong years ago, when Luke had outbid him on a contract that cost Tom his reputation in town. Now, Tom's eyes gleamed with malice, his voice dripping with mockery. "Well, look at you, Luke, playing house with a stranger," Tom sneered, stepping closer. "Heard you married some woman you don't even know just to keep a dead man's promise. How pathetic is that?" His companions laughed, their presence intimidating as they loomed behind him. Emma, standing in the hallway, overheard the cruel words and felt a surge of protectiveness. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension. "You don't know anything about us," she said, her eyes narrowing. "If you got a problem with Luke, say it and leave." Tom's gaze shifted to Emma, his smirk widening. "Oh, the little wife has some fire, huh? You think you can stand up to me?" Luke's always been a coward, hiding behind his so-called honor. He took a step toward Luke, his tone menacing. You owe me, Luke. That deal you stole? It ruined me. I'm here to make sure you pay. Luke's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. That was years ago, Tom. It was fair business. Let go. But Tom wasn't listening. He shoved Luke hard, causing him to stumble back into the house. Emma gasped, her heart racing. But she quickly moved to Luke's side, grabbing his arm to steady him. Get out, Emma said, her voice firm, though her hands trembled slightly. We don't want trouble. Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it. Trouble's already here, sweetheart. You think you two can just play happy family and ignore the past? He gestured to his men, who stepped closer, their expressions menacing. Luke stepped in front of Emma, his voice low but resolute. If you want to settle something, Tom, you deal with me. Leave her out of this. His protective stance surprised Emma, and for the first time, she saw a fierceness in him she hadn't noticed before. Despite the fear in her chest, she felt a strange sense of strength standing beside him. Emma, refusing to back down, grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the nearby kitchen counter. I said, get out, she repeated, her voice louder now, the skillet raised as a warning. The sight of her, small but defiant, caught Tom off guard. His men hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. For a tense moment, the air was thick with the threat of violence. Luke locked eyes with Tom, his gaze unwavering. You've made your point, Tom. Now leave, or you'll regret it. There was a new edge to Luke's voice, a determination born from his growing care for Emma and their shared life. Tom scoffed, but the defiance in Luke and Emma's united front unnerved him. He muttered something under his breath, then signaled to his men. This ain't over, Luke, he spat, turning to leave. You'll see me again. The trio retreated into the night, their footsteps fading as the door slammed shut behind them. Luke and Emma stood in silence, the adrenaline still coursing through them. Emma lowered the skillet, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. Luke turned to her, his eyes searching her face. Are you okay? He asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. Emma nodded, her breath uneven. I'm fine. Are you? She reached out, touching his arm where Tom had shoved him. Luke managed a small smile, grateful for her presence. Yeah, thanks to you. I didn't expect you to, well, grab a skillet like that. Emma let out a shaky laugh, the tension breaking slightly. I didn't either, but I wasn't going to let them hurt you. In that moment, something shifted between them. They had faced a threat together, and though it was small, it solidified their bond. Luke realized that Emma wasn't just someone he was bound to by a promise. She was his partner, someone who would stand by him no matter what. Emma, too, felt a surge of trust in Luke, seeing his willingness to protect her, even when he was scared himself. One evening, after an especially quiet day, Emma finally opened up to Luke. The vulnerability she had been hiding for so long came to the surface as she spoke about her past. She revealed the traumas she had experienced, the loss of her parents, the struggles she faced in her childhood, and the ways she had learned to guard her heart. Her voice trembled at times, but there was a strength in her words. She admitted that she had never truly trusted anyone after all the pain she had gone through. But something about Luke had begun to change that. She realized that her connection with him went beyond the arrangement they had made. There was more to this marriage than she had first allowed herself to believe, and for the first time, she allowed herself to trust Luke. Luke, too, found himself sharing more with Emma than he ever expected. He confessed his fears, how he had been afraid that this marriage would only be a reminder of Jack's dying wish and his own feelings of guilt. He spoke about how he had struggled to find his place in this marriage, how it had begun out of obligation, but how, slowly, he had started to care for her in a way he hadn't anticipated. Luke admitted that he had never been good at letting his guard down, but Emma had somehow managed to break through his walls. In return, Emma listened, understanding his pain, and opening herself up to him in a way she never thought possible. As the conversation deepened, they both realized that they had been carrying more than just their own baggage. They had been holding on to the past, letting it dictate the present and their future. But now, in this moment, they were ready to let go. They were ready to face the truth about why they had ended up in this marriage and, more importantly, what they wanted moving forward. For the first time, they saw each other not as strangers or people bound by a promise, but as partners, two people who had been through their own struggles and had found something real in each other. With that new understanding, their relationship began to transform. No longer was it a marriage of convenience. It had become something deeper, more profound. They started to talk about their future, openly and without hesitation. They spoke about their hopes, their dreams, and what they wanted out of life together. It wasn't perfect, and they both knew it would take time, but there was something different now. There was a sense of commitment that had never existed before. They weren't in this because they had to be. They were in it because they wanted to be. They were ready to build a future together, not just as two people who had been thrown together by circumstance, but as two people who had chosen each other, despite everything. Their relationship blossomed in small but significant ways. There were moments of tenderness, of laughter, and even moments of silence that no longer felt heavy with uncertainty. They had come to terms with their pasts, but more importantly, they had started to shape a future together. Luke and Emma were no longer just two people living under the same roof out of duty. They were two people who had learned to trust, respect, and care for each other. And though they both knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, they had made a commitment to one another, to grow together, to face whatever came their way as partners, not out of obligation, but because they truly wanted to. For the first time, Luke understood that what they had was real. It wasn't the kind of love he had expected, but it was the kind of love that grew from shared experiences, mutual respect, and a deep understanding of each other's flaws and strengths. And for Emma, the feeling was the same. She had come to see Luke not as the stranger who had married her out of a promise, but as someone she had come to care for deeply. The walls she had built around her heart were slowly crumbling, and she was finally allowing herself to experience the kind of love she had always been too afraid to trust. They had both come a long way from where they had started, and while they knew there would still be challenges ahead, they had learned that the best way forward was together. With their past behind them and their hearts open to the future, they began the next chapter of their lives. Not as two people bound by obligation, but as true partners in every sense of the word. Just when things seemed to be settling for Luke and Emma, an unexpected challenge arose. Emma received a letter from a family member she hadn't heard from in years, asking her to return and deal with unresolved issues. At the same time, Luke was presented with a career opportunity in another city, one that could change his life but also risk their relationship. Both were faced with difficult choices, and the tension between them grew. However, after many long discussions, they decided to face these challenges together. Luke supported Emma's decision to confront her past, while Emma encouraged him to pursue his career opportunity. They faced their problems united, showing how far they had come as a couple. In the process, Luke reflected on how much he had changed since marrying Emma. What had started as a marriage of duty had evolved into something much deeper. Emma had shown him what true love and care meant, and through their journey, he realized that he had not only changed Emma's life, but his own as well. Emma, too, reflected on her growth. She had healed emotionally with Luke's support, and she began to accept that love and happiness could come unexpectedly. Their relationship had blossomed into something more profound, no longer just a marriage of convenience. They had come to terms with their past and decided to move forward together, stronger than before. Luke and Emma were ready for the next chapter, facing the future not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to be together. This story is about transformation and healing. Luke and Emma, brought together by circumstance, learned to trust and love each other over time. Their journey shows that true love often grows from unexpected beginnings, and that happiness comes when two people are willing to work through their pasts and face the future together.